What's up, guys? Ben Carey here with Capwise. Joining me again is Rob Vino from Rob Vino Sports and Wager Talk. Rob, how you doing?
I am doing good today, Ben. A little early week analysis. Heading into, it goes by so quick, right? We're talking about
Yeah,
week 3 already in the college football season, but certainly we saw some results Saturday that didn't add up to what you had seen in week 1 the previous Saturday, and that's par for the course in college football. And
absolutely.
we'll see how week 3 shakes out, but I think we've got starting to get a pretty good beat on it.
Yeah. So overall, though, for you, was it a good weekend betting wise?
You know what? It was only about 50-50, Ben, and the main reason was my top play, which was the over between Nebraska and Buffalo, didn't even come close.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the worst. Uh, Normally you can say I had a chance, and it could have got there if, and I have none of those. Nebraska got a couple TDs called back in that game, but it
Mm-hmm.
was a run fest from start to finish, and Buffalo just did not participate offensively the way I thought maybe they could. So it was wrong from the get go.
Yeah. Well, if you want to talk about bad plays, I had a few of those. Overall, I did well because Arkansas
Hmm.
came through. We were on the money line and the spread, but UTEP was one that it was a little misleading, but their defense just looked god awful. That was a great way to start that Friday. And then what was the other one? Oh, Colorado State. My God, they have
Yeah.
some big issues in Fort Collins. So we'll put it that way. So luckily we don't have to discuss that one today. But we're gonna start it off with one that I know you recommended we discuss, and this is gonna be a fun one because I'm kind of looking forward to it from a betting perspective, but it's also interesting because 20 years ago, I feel like these two teams were on the same playing field, the same level, and the programs have kind of taken different paths since then, and that's Nebraska and Oklahoma. The reports were that Nebraska didn't want to play this game. I don't know how true those were, but it makes sense, right? Because Oklahoma's a powerhouse. They're 22.5 point favorites, 61.5 for a total. Now, Rob, I want to get on the same page here with an opener because I'm seeing a few different numbers. What do you have for an opener?
I showed it opening as OU 21.5 with a total of 60.5.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was looking on Vegas Insider and then OddsShark, and I saw like two different numbers. So um, I saw like a 64 and a 23 for 23 and a half as an opener. So maybe that information is incorrect. But yeah, I wanted to first discuss that because that kind of changes what we expect from a line move, right?
Yeah, and I think that some of the offshores that open real early, Ben, don't accept a lot of money. So it's very possible 23 and 64 were openers, but when $500 moves the line,
What does that say? Yeah.
yeah, so it basically you're looking for a shop that takes a lot of money when they open. And
Mhm.
I show, like I say, what I use 21.5 and 60.5. It's bumped up since then. I'm showing 22, even some 22.5s and 61.5 right now.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the total first and foremost because I initially had a lean towards the over, but I know that you were on that Nebraska team last week. Is this a little bit of how well they played on defense? Maybe why we're not seeing this total shoot up?
Well, I'll say this: the very first, and again, I'm one of those guys. I think I've told you before. I put everything pen to paper, so I've got these notes written in front of me. And the first note for your show here on this game is that it's a major, 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 three majors I have written here. Step up in class for the Nebraska defense. Right, their
Yes.
numbers look pretty gaudy right now. However, it was Illinois in their first game under
And
Brett
Illinois look
Bielema.
bad.
Yeah, Illinois is not a good offense by
Yeah.
any stretch, and Brett Bielema is a conservative head coach. They played FCS Fordham, who a few years ago with Joe Moorhead throwing it around a lot was decent, but not anymore. And
Mhm.
then last week it was Buffalo, and as I described to you, Buffalo had no problem handing off all game long. So they have seen nothing, even remotely close to the explosiveness of Oklahoma. They haven't seen Spencer Rattler, Kennedy Brooks, Marvin Mims, any of these, and the Oklahoma offensive line. Let's add that in because these games are won in the trenches. And will Nebraska stand up? They look pretty good first three on both sides of the line, but this is a different deal when you're facing this offensive line. To their benefit, Adrian Martinez is just a handful. I mean, he becomes a one-man band at times for this team. I don't know whatever happened to the Scott Frost Central Florida offense, but we're not seeing it at Nebraska right now. Adrian Martinez happens to lead this team in rushing, yardage, and yards per carry. And I want to point that out only because he could be a handful for Oklahoma. 2 weeks ago when Oklahoma barely got by Tulane, 40-35, right? Michael Pratt, the quarterback for Tulane, who is a dual threat, but he's not on Adrian Martinez's running level. But Michael Pratt ran it 11 times for 81 yards if I weed out the sack yardage, right? And gained 7.4.
He needed 82, and they might have won that game.
Yeah, they might. That's right. If they get the 13 yards for a first down, they could have gone in to win that game. So, yeah, Michael Pratt did pretty good damage to Oklahoma. Had a 28-yard run, was his longest. So Martinez certainly could. His accuracy, Martinez, it's still in question. His numbers show 62.2% completions, but when you watch him up close, some balls are beautifully thrown, some are miserably inaccurate. Here's the real key here, Ben, and I kind of like the over, but I'm sitting on this. We're doing this a little early in the week. We're going to check some injury situations here. But Samori Toure from Montana, the FCS transfer at wide receiver, is a FBS top-level talent at wide receiver. And Oklahoma is going to go into this game without their top corner, Woody Washington, out of this game. And they're also possibly missing their top nickelback, slot corner, so to speak. So they could be without two real good pieces. And we know Oklahoma's weak pass defense anyway. So there's a chance for Nebraska to take advantage, but I'll preface it by saying they've got cluster injuries in that wide receiver tight end group, their receiver group, that aren't really defined yet. Not a lot of outs. Austin Allen, their top tight end, he's got a concussion. We'll see if he clears protocol. But then their number 2 and number 3 guys, Oliver Martin and Omar Manning, neither played last week, and both are kind of foggy about this week. But if they play, I would think Nebraska can give Oklahoma a lot of trouble through the air in this game, and which would lead me to play over is probably the bottom line, because I think Oklahoma's going to get theirs. If Nebraska can come back and get theirs, and Oklahoma's been vulnerable defensively, let's face it. So we'll see. I think injuries will speak a lot to how we play this game. But right now I am, like you said earlier, I'm leaning toward over as well.
Yeah, my lean's the over too, and for a few reasons. As you mentioned, on the outside, yeah, Nebraska has an advantage there, and that receiver from Montana, he might actually have a chance to be drafted. Like they've been saying he's a really, really good talent, and he's kind of been overshadowed by just Nebraska's program as a whole this year. Even though they're 2-1, but it's a 2-1 that I think has an asterisk on it, right? Who have they beaten, and how did they look against Illinois? So they come into this one. I'm certainly leaning on the over too, because I can see in the fourth quarter, maybe even the second half as a whole, Nebraska gets a few touchdowns in that prevent defense. Now, as far as the spread goes, 22, 21, what was it again? I've lost it here. 22 currently, right?
Yeah, we're sitting around 22 right now.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's sitting in that range where you could see Oklahoma being up by 4 scores, and then Nebraska gets a cheap one. So I'm not going to have any interest on the side. What about you?
I'm kind of with you, because I think that there is still, albeit an older rivalry, right? This used to be one of the biggest rivalries in college football. If I go back to, my younger days in the Big 8 and stuff like that, this used to really be a game that everybody looked forward to. They haven't really played it much since then, but I do think that history probably is dredged up this week for both teams. And I think Nebraska is going to give you their best shot, because Nebraska has a lot to prove. If they were ever to pull this game out, Ben, that takes Scott Frost not only off a hot seat, but puts him on a pretty good seat if he can win this game.
That hands down be his biggest win, not even close.
Right?
Like, we're talking here, and then his second one. I don't even know. Hands down would be his biggest win. And it's funny you say that about this rivalry because my dad went to Nebraska. He told me all the stories back in the 80s of these two teams. Like it was must-watch TV. And now you're getting like an early spot. It's not a primetime game. And Fox is – I don't know if you saw the trailers yet for this, but they're trying to hype it up and they're trying to cater to more the older generation because, we know they know what that rivalry means, but the kids playing, they don't have any clue other than what Frost and maybe some of the other coaches are telling them. So it's going to be really interesting to see these two teams play.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that they're in different conferences now, they never see each other. Motivationally, Lincoln Riley or Scott Frost both have to do their job here. I think if you're Scott Frost and you see what happened yesterday to Clay Helton, that could happen to you if you lose by 35 here. So there's every reason to get this team fired up. But I'm sure Nebraska's players, the underdog always likes the big stage. I think Oklahoma probably views Nebraska as a little mosquito that they can swat away. But sometimes
a look-ahead spot.
Yeah,
Oklahoma
get challenged.
They don't have Texas isn't a few, right? Who do they have after this? Texas. Now they play that game late. Yeah, that's right. Oh,
that's
West
usually
Virginia.
in October.
Yeah, West Virginia. Okay.
Okay, so that's a conference game. Is it a home game or in Morgan?
It is a home game. Yeah, so they get 2 home games back to back.
Yeah, we'll
Actually,
see.
4. They've only played home games. Yeah.
It's crazy. They'll have something to prove because the only time they've played an FBS team, we'll throw that 76-0 against Western Carolina in the garbage from last week. That's a mismatch and a half. But the game against Tulane raised eyebrows, again, from people who thought Oklahoma could seriously challenge for a Final Four playoff berth, and then they come out and only beat Tulane by 5. And like as you mentioned, at the end of that game, a Tulane first down, they fall 1 yard short. That ending could have been very, very different. So I think they'll both be motivated.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun one. Early start time. It's going to be a good one to get the day started. So let's hop on into our second game. And before we do that, thank you all for joining us. I know some of you are on Twitter, some on Twitch. But we're going to hop into Michigan State at Miami. So this Michigan State team off to a pretty good start. They returned so many players from last year. And I know we've talked about the returning players, but I think it really benefited Michigan State just because of the situation they were in, right? New head coach, Mel Tucker, he needed that year, and getting those guys to return. And then, some of the recruits he brought in was a good recipe for success for him to start the season. They're facing a Miami team that got blown out, of course, by Bama. They beat Appalachian State, but didn't cover that. Was that one you were on? I forget. Maybe that was the week before you were on App State.
I didn't end up playing that game. Either way, we didn't know really. We might have discussed that, Ben, if I remember right. But I think that the mindset of Miami, whether or not they were going to be, their head would be in it after the Alabama game, was concerning to me. So I laid off that game.
Yeah, so they're sitting at 6.5 right now. Total 57. Now it's interesting. This opened at -8.5. I'm showing, and is down to 6.5. I see 6.5. It looks like. Are you seeing that too? Also, just want to make sure
I am seeing down to 6.5. Yeah, almost universally. Yeah,
that's interesting because 8.5. I mean, immediately crossed a key number. When I say immediately, early, maybe the sharps are on. That Michigan State side. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you lean here on the side?
Well, I think the downward movement obviously is a reaction to what's happened first couple of weeks. This is one of those weeks, Ben, where we have to really examine who's played who in the first 2 weeks. And, my power ratings happen to indicate that the strength of schedule played by these two teams is vastly in favor of Miami. Not only did they play Alabama, the best team in the nation, but they played Appalachian State, who's, either they or Coastal Carolina or UL Lafayette. The Sun Belt has gotten so good, but they're one of 3 teams that likely wins the Sun Belt, and Appalachian return like 20 starters. And remember, got Chase Bryce at quarterback from Duke, and played Miami last week, tooth and nail, 25-23. So those two opponents for Miami, as opposed to Pat Fitzgerald's Northwestern team, which was ravaged by personnel losses. I think they returned like 3 on offense, 2 on defense or something. I mean, it's a total rebuild in Evanston for Northwestern. And then they play Youngstown State last week, which is, a borderline playoff team where FCS is concerned, but they're in the Missouri Valley, which makes it real tough on them to get into the playoffs. So when I add up power ratings there, I show Miami to be significantly better as far as strength of schedule is concerned, and that may come into play here. We don't know how good Michigan State is. The results look nice. The numbers look really nice, and we'll go through a couple of them here, but let's start with Miami. And again, you'd have to ask yourself, did they let down a little bit last week? You could say yes, you could say no, because Appalachian State is a worthy opponent. I don't want to sell them short by saying, it was a 2-point game because Miami let down. Miami did have a small 375 to 326 total yard advantage. Their defense played well. They faced 12 drives from Appalachian State. 9 of those drives, they held App State to 31 yards or less. Only 3 times did they gain more than 31 yards on a drive.
Wow.
And they only allowed 16 points in that game. App State had a 100-yard kickoff return for their other touchdown. So pretty good on the defensive side. The offensive side was not really as good. They settled for 4 field goal attempts. They didn't make them all, but they settled for 4 field goal attempts inside, well, let's put it this way, at the App State 26-yard line or deeper. A couple of those were inside the red zone where they just had to settle for 3s rather than get 7s. So the offense, and again, I don't want to sell Appalachian State short. It's a veteran defense with 10 returning starters. Good team. Here's what we have to figure out here. Michigan State's ground game has been terrific. Kenneth Walker, the Wake Forest transfer running back, has led this team 321 yards in 2 weeks, 5 TDs. But the team overall is averaging 299 on the ground. Again, opposition has to be taken into consideration. The Miami run defense, we have to point this out, Ben, because when you're playing run defense against Alabama's offensive line, and when you're playing run defense against Appalachian State, who returned all 5 offensive line starters and is known for running the football, Miami's only allowed 3.8 per carry. That's a great number against those two teams. So, you might be able to stop Michigan State here if Michigan State's not for real. In that case, turn it over to the passing game for Michigan State, which again has been real good. Peyton Thorne, Anthony Russo, Temple transferred 2 good throwing quarterbacks, and they've got receivers. The 2 kids, Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor, are big-time wideouts. So we'll see if they get forced to be one-dimensional through the air, and can Miami stop them, because they've only sacked the quarterback twice in 73 attempts so far. Again, the 2 offensive lines they've gone up against might be better than this Michigan State offensive line for all we know. I think the biggest key here, Ben, is you have to make a decision as a handicapper if you believe in what Michigan State has done so far, or if you believe that after what Miami's played, they're going to, get lined up against Michigan State and be able to do some damage. I might lean to the latter. I don't necessarily agree with such a sharp drop in the line, 8.5 down to 6.5, because now 7 becomes a winner if you have Miami and you can win by 7.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's some syndicate groups who jumped on this at 8.5 and probably bet Miami 6.5. I wouldn't see why not, right?
Right. Little middle, yeah.
Yeah, 100% a middle at a key number of 7. For me, I have to lean with Miami here. I think you nailed it. I mean, Michigan State, look who they played. I mean, Youngstown State, what did we really, get from that? Not much. And Northwestern was a team that I think they were in bottom 10 for returning talent, so they were in a tough spot there. Yeah, I think Miami is a team that potentially could sneak this one out and win. And when I say sneak out the cover, I think they can win and cover this spot. I don't know if I'm going to be playing this one because that line move is just it's really interesting to me. Man, I mean, it immediately went down, and I just don't know how good this Michigan State team actually is. It's if you had to ask me, I'm going to say they're not good and Miami's going to cover, but I also could be a fool there. So I'm not quite sure.
We don't often talk about, speed as being a factor, Ben, but I'll say this. Northwestern is very pedestrian, without a lot of speed on the perimeter to challenge. Youngstown State is prehistoric in their offensive approach. It's
Yeah.
handoff, 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 and they really don't throw the football whatsoever. So Michigan State, I'm not sure that they're ready for De'Ara King at
Mhm.
quarterback, right? And his mobility and his playmaking ability and the Miami speed that comes along with it on the offensive side of the football. And again, we're going to find out, and to each his own as a better, as a handicapper, whichever side of the fence you choose to stand on. But I think, my best guess, my power ratings indicate Miami should have been an 8-point favorite. That was the opener, eight and a
Yeah.
half, right?
That
So it
that
was
would have
in
been
that
my guess
vicinity.
too. Yeah.
And
It was. It opened at that.
you might turn that on and see Michigan State still recruits pretty good, and Mel Tucker's a good recruiter.
Mhm.
It's going to be interesting. We're going to find out a lot about Michigan State in this upcoming week.
So here's an interesting question someone asked. It
Yeah.
might have been to the last game. I'm going to answer first, and I want to hear what you think about this. Aaron asked, how many plays does it take to theoretically gas a defense? So, in my opinion, I don't know if it's so much the number of plays, but it's more at the extent they ran, the pace, right? If they're going back to back to back. But 85, 90, I mean, yeah, that's quite a bit, right? To put that in perspective, I think Iowa ran like 60 plays last week. We'll get to that game coming up next, but I guess what would your answer be to that?
Well, I would say the pace, the time between snap is always the most important, right? The total plays can be run up at the end of a game if you're trailing and you're running to the line of scrimmage, just getting off plays. In essence, that can be run up. But I will say this. It also, those teams like UCF and now Tennessee with Josh Heupel, those teams that play extreme pace and play in extreme heat, that doesn't take but, it could be a 3-play drive in a minute and a half, right? And the total plays don't add up. But the fact that you ran one every 12 seconds and hit a 55-yarder because the team is gassed because of the heat and humidity, that has an effect on it as well. So I don't know if snaps are something to look at for sure. But time between snaps is really crucial. And if you can get those numbers, I happen to keep them for myself. Because I do think they're that important.
Yeah. And then he says, is it less taxing with 70% passes versus 70% runs? It's kind of tough to say, right? It's how the teams kind of build up because a D line can get exhausted. I mean, that's been teams, like Iowa, Wisconsin, they've been doing that for years, where there's running it up the gut. And I mean, it's just tiring out the interior of a defense. I would say that overall, spreading a team out is the way to go, because if you can get 320-pound lineman running, you're in a good spot there. So it's kind of hard to say. I guess I would say passes, but kind of depends the makeup of the team. So let's talk about Iowa. We've been bringing them up a few times here. This is one I wanted to discuss a little bit because I think it's a interesting matchup, and I really wanted to get your thoughts on it too, because this is a Kent State team that's going to be heading to Iowa City that I actually like a lot in the MAC. It's funny, their win total was only 6.5, but they were one of the favorites to compete for that MAC championship, and it's just because their off-season or their non-conference schedule is so tough. They played Texas A&M. Who did they have week one? I'm spacing that.
They had A&M week one. Last week they had VMI.
Oh, VMI, that's right. Yeah, and they obviously dominated that team. I think are they D2 now? Are they 1AA?
VMI is FCS, yeah.
Oh, they are FCS.
They're in the Southern Conference.
Yeah, and they won. I think they won 65 to something. Wasn't a game.
Right.
Of course, they were outmatched. But this Iowa team looked really good last week, defensively, offensively. They got the job done. They won the game. They're favored by 22.5 in this one. Totals at 56, which I'm actually surprised because it opened up at 55 and it's going up a little bit. What are your thoughts on this one with the line move and the spread?
All right. Well, I will say that of the three games we're going to talk about here, this is the most situational play. If we just throw the fundamentals, which we won't do, but if you were to just push those aside and say what Iowa's been through in the first 2 weeks, are a huge Big Ten conference game against Indiana, who everybody adored
Yep.
preseason. And then they come right back with in-state rival Iowa State inside the top 10, who, again, most preseason publications adored the Iowa State side, and they've beaten them both. And you wonder if this isn't a game where they just breathe, sigh, gasp, come up for air a little bit against Kent State after playing those two, which they were hugely emotional games. If Iowa State, this is why it becomes situational, because if Iowa State, if Iowa comes to play 100% focused, then you're likely to see, because they're so much like Texas A&M. I mean, Kirk Ferentz, Jimbo Fisher, run the football, play. The similarities are endless between those two. And Texas A&M destroyed this team 45-10. Kent, for all their pace and for all their offense, could only gain 338 total yards, and they got beat 45-10.
Crum had what, like 70 yards passing?
Yeah,
Insane.
they had 110 total passing.
Yeah.
And if Iowa comes, their defense is every bit as good as A&M's. So that could be the answer. The other, let me speak closer to the total here for a second, Ben, because what we hear after 2 weeks is, yeah, Iowa's got this tremendous defense, but man, they still stink on offense. And now they're the same exact philosophy on offense, right?
Yeah.
They're very pedestrian, methodical. We're not going to take too many chances. But again, they played Tom Allen's Indiana defense. They played Iowa State Cyclones defense, which is very, very good under Matt Campbell. And now they're going to get Kent's MAC defense, which just isn't real good. So if their point production is going to go up mid-30s, high 30s, it's going to be this week, which is probably why the total has been bumped up a little bit. Because if Iowa gets to 38, then in any letdown situation, if Kent were to get to 20, and Kent's more than capable of getting 20 if Iowa doesn't play 60 minutes worth of defense here, then that's, you're over the total right there.
Yeah.
Boom. So I think that's why it might have gone up a little bit. I wouldn't play Iowa here in this situation just because I do feel like this is I don't want to call it letdown, but I do want to say the importance placed on those first two games and to get through them was huge for Iowa. This one is not the same. So maybe total over.
I agree with you, because next week they have Colorado State, but it's just coming off two emotional games.
Yeah.
Because let's say they win this one by like 17 and it was closer than they wanted. They're going to be mentally focused for Colorado State, and they're going to be probably either way, because Colorado State is an absolute dumpster fire right now. But I like what you're saying, though, because you could come off to a little bit of a slow start here against a Kent State team. I could definitely see that. So Iowa, 2.9 yards per play last week against Iowa State, and only 173 yards. Those interceptions were huge by Purdy, and ultimately I think that's kind of what controlled the game for them. But in this one, I actually jumped on the 55.5, and I'm surprised it moved, but I can see why. But I mean, I wouldn't have bet it at 55.5 if I thought it was going to go up to 56. It was one of those numbers that I had enough confidence in, but it does hurt to not get the closing line value. And that's not to say that it can't come back, because I think as the weather forecast matures, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some wind in this one. It's September, October. I mean, that's very Iowa weather. I'm showing like 12 to 15 mile per hour winds, but things can change, and never just play a total strictly off the weather. That can be a little dangerous. But yeah, I like the number at 55.5. It did get to 56. I think the biggest thing is, you alluded to, Texas A&M and Iowa have very similar physical styles of defense. And I think there's a lot of similarities on how the game may go. And I think people see that 70 spot that Kent State just put up, but it's just night and day, the type of defense that VMI is going to show versus Kent State. So, but it does worry me, because Kent State's a team, if they're down big, they can move the ball, because Dustin Crum, that's what he does, right? And I think he went pretty deep into the fourth quarter, I believe, against Texas A&M. I would have to double check that. I know they brought in another guy, but I guess they're probably not going to pull him by the fourth quarter. I would guess, unless it's like maybe if it's like a 40-0 type game. But yeah, it just was a tad alarming to see that 56 pop up. But I still feel confident. And who knows? This could still end and close at a 54. So it's just interesting. It's an interesting move.
I would say this for people that are looking to bet the side. For me, it would be Kent State or not at all. Yeah. And I'll add one more reason in why, Ben, because they've already seen this. They saw Texas A&M. They didn't perform well against it, but they saw it.
Yeah,
and
adjustments
can
be
made.
That punch in the mouth, right? And they're like, all right.
And now it's the second time in 3 weeks they're going to see it, and maybe there's some adjustments made. And I'll also say that Iowa hasn't really played a tempo team yet. Indiana and Iowa State don't rush it to the line every 12, 13 seconds the way Kent does. And if we're talking about a potential, just slow start by Iowa or whatnot, why not the defensive line getting worn down? Why, Iowa can obviously control the football and keep their defense on the sidelines. That can happen too.
Yeah.
But I think there's way more reasons why you would take the 22.5 with Kent, including backdoor in the fourth quarter, because they're never done scoring, so to speak. They're never, you never, in the last possession, you're not thinking, oh my God, there's no way they're going to score. They can always score.
Oh, yeah.
So 22.5 seems like a lot. It gets a very, very conservative team that's played two very huge emotional games right off the bat.
And Kent State has to be up there in pace of play, right? I mean, they have to.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. Yeah, they're one of the top 10.
That's how they played last year. That's how they play with Dustin Crum. So they're going to have opportunities to score from the standpoint of getting multiple possessions. Is just, does it come down to, can they move the ball against Iowa? But they're going to take some shots.
Right.
They'll try to get it going. So yeah, interesting to see where this closes at. But 100%, I think the pace kind of factors into this one. And yeah, we'll see if Iowa continues their deep. I mean, they made Purdy look like a JV player out there, man. I mean, that there's like reports coming out. They're like, is Purdy going to be benched? Like, imagine a year ago I was saying that, right? Like, he was like the next big thing. So
yeah, and let's give him credit because that's 2 in a row. Michael Penix Jr. for Indiana is a tremendous quarterback, and they picked him off and ran 2 back for touchdowns as well. So it's no fluke what Iowa's doing pass defense-wise. They're tough. They're tough, and they made 2 really, really good nationally known quarterbacks look very, very average in 2 weeks. And they didn't need a whole lot of offense to win that game by 10 points, by double digits. As you mentioned the numbers, right? Not even 200 total yards, I don't think, in that game for Iowa.
Yeah, it's somewhat, I don't want to say it's misleading, but they did dominate, but it wasn't so much offensively. I'll put it that way. And I had the under in that, and that was, oh man, that was a close one just because I think there were a few interceptions in the red zone. I was like, oh man, yeah, that was a little bit of a sweat to start the day. So I'm glad that one came through. All right, we got a few more minutes before you leave. I know you have plenty of other games you're going to be discussing throughout the week on some different shows and such. But is there any game that kind of catches your eye that you want to talk about, or potentially something you want to bring up to the audience?
Well, I feel like, and I don't have my eye on it right now. She can help me with the number here. But yesterday, when the openers came out, the Notre Dame Purdue total was 58.5.
Yeah.
And I just, I immediately played it for myself at 58.5 over the number because Notre Dame just seems to be taking a totally different turn this year, and that is toward allowing points and towards being able to push the ball downfield with Jack Cohn's arm and scoring points. And Purdue is one of the most electric wide receiving cores that there is in the Big Ten. I mean, you can argue Ohio State's definitely one, but if I'm going to rate number 2 with David Bell and company at Purdue, they're likely to give, and the quarterback play is really good there with Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell. So I think Notre Dame will be tested defensively. There's some issues there that I don't know it can be solved against an offense this good. And Purdue, obviously, will be tested by this Notre Dame offense. Brian Kelly has always liked it best when he can go quicker, and he's more of an offensive-minded head coach.
Yeah.
You know, that's where his expertise is on offense and scoring points, and he has that type of offense this year. And Kyron Williams hasn't even gotten going at running back yet. So, you know, to me, Ben, we saw Toledo last week. What was it, 32-29, 61 points that game finished at. I could see this one being even higher scoring than that with Purdue's passing game.
If I would have told you back in June or July that this would be all the way up to 58.5, I probably wouldn't believe it. I mean, I would have guessed like a 54, to be completely honest, just with how these teams typically have played in the past. But yeah, like you said, they're using Cohen and kind of his style versus them saying, no, we're going to have you, you know, control the ball a little more and slow the pace. I like what they're doing there because I think that's a good move. And then Purdue, like you said, their threats on the wide receiver side of the ball. Yeah, I mean, with Rondell Moore leaving last year, I wasn't sure how those guys would kind of step up, but they seem to be fine.
Yeah, David Bell's been good for 2 years now, and he's an NFL wide receiver, no doubt about it. Milton Wright and the rest of that crew, very, very good, very talented. They give people fits. But I think they played Oregon State week 1, and it was a 30-21 Purdue win. They're a sneaky good team here under Jeff Brom. I'll tell you, you know, and I don't mean to drag this out, Ben, but Jeff Brom is a head coach when he came over from Western Kentucky. We all read an awful lot, and we all try to get as much as we can on these teams from beat writers. And a lot of times when we listen to head coaches talk and we read head coaching quotes, it's nothing but a bunch of coach speak.
We always talk about that. It's the coaches are never saying we don't have any depth at wide receiver, or we suck at wide receiver. It's usually good things, or they're kind of quiet about it.
and this guy, from the day he took the job, has been the most brutally honest head coach that, you know, he's one guy, just to sum this up quickly, he's one guy that when he speaks, I put a lot of stock into what he says because he's forever telling you the truth about what he thinks about his team, where his team's strengths are, and where their weaknesses are. And so, you know, Brom in this, I think it's his 4th year at Purdue, 3rd or 4th year since he left Western Kentucky.
4th.
But he loves his offense, and I can't see any reason why he shouldn't, because they've got talent all over the place. They're a sneaky team in the Big Ten West. I wouldn't be surprised if they cause a little bit of trouble to some of the higher ups as far as point spread covers, Ben, because that's the business we deal in, right? We don't care about straight up wins. We just want to cash a ticket for us. Just do that, and we love you.
Yeah, Rob, you're not going to be coming on here to give us +3 or -300 or 3,000, right? Like that,
right.
That doesn't do any good. Yeah. So
and the AP top 25, the coaches polls, I don't think a lot of us never even know what they are.
We talked about that week 1, and I said the only time you look at that is almost maybe if you can get some overreaction from the market, and we saw that with Arkansas and Texas, right? Texas,
yeah.
And everyone's like, "Oh, Texas is back," and I told people, I said, Texas is not back, and they would have to even beat Oklahoma and continue their success if I said they're back. And I knew they weren't back, and I think they're benching Card.
Yes, I saw that yesterday. Yep.
It's just crazy how, you know, quickly things can change. And speaking of quickly changing things, USC, I wanted to just get your thoughts on that one real quick, because that was, I talked to some Trojan fans and they weren't too surprised. I was a little surprised because I guess I didn't watch the game, and Stanford really just dominated that game apparently. But now with Helton gone, USC on the road, 8.5. I know a lot of people aren't running to bet the Trojans after something like that, but how do you feel about that number, or is this a spot where you just stay away?
Well, the first thing I look for is how the kids respond to the interim, right? A lot of
Yeah.
times the interim is a coordinator, either offensive or defense, that the kids really love and they play hard for. You see that in bowl games a lot, right?
Oh,
Usually in a bowl
absolutely.
game, an interim steps in. In this case, it's the associate head coach, the cornerbacks coach. He's got three different, I think he's the defensive passing game coordinator, three different titles.
Dante Williams, it looks like.
Right. And
Okay.
he's got wears three different hats for the team. I just don't know what the player relationships are with him, but if they named him interim, they've got to be good. We'll see what the morale is like. We know they've got the talent, and this probably was a long time coming, this firing. There's USC people that will tell you this should have happened 2
Yeah.
years ago, and this guy was just surviving by the skin of his teeth.
Hmm.
So last week's game, and from somebody who had the game successfully, client release on the over 53 and a half. But who expected Stanford to get 42 of them? That's not supposed
Yeah,
to happen.
it's like one of those games where you get the total right, but it's not the way you thought. Like, for example, I told a few people, I was like, I like the under in the Eagles Falcons game because I think the Falcons defense is going to be a lot better than people thought. Well, it ended up being the other way around, and you kind of just it's one you take if you bet, but you don't
Right.
really tout it like an Arkansas, right? That's one that you take some credit for. So I saw the 8.5, and I still think USC's a pretty damn talented team. It just kind of comes down to, are they going to be motivated? And I don't know. It's hard to say. I might have to do a little digging. I mean, there's so much on the board, and that's the beauty of college football. We don't have to pigeonhole ourselves into games like these. And there's one other I just want to bring up with you, Rob. UConn, Army. Do we? I mean, at any point, do we look to take UConn with the points, or are we just crazy for even doing that?
What's Army giving them this week?
33.
Well,
And it's
I
a
mean,
total of 47, which if you break it down, that's coming out to like a 7.5 implied total, more or less, for UConn. So, yeah.
yeah, that 40-7. Is that what that comes out to?
Let me do the math on that. Just I want to make sure it's got to be close to that, because we're going to take this divided by 2, 23.5, and then yeah, it's like 40 to it could be 6.5, 7.5. Well, that'd be 13. So it's right around there. That's crazy. I mean, it almost like if they get a touchdown, they cover their point total.
Yeah, you wonder how UConn will stop that wishbone at any point in the game. I mean, Army might only have 8 or 9 possessions, which is par for the course when they play. But they'll probably have 7 touchdowns on those possessions. So it'll come down to whether or not UConn can score, and they haven't shown us that ability. What's right? Purdue beat them badly last week. I think that game was only 7-0 at the end of one, and then it was 35-0 at halftime. So they just are not.
Aaron says just keep fading UConn till it fails.
I think he's right.
Yeah. The end of the Army Western Kentucky game was really interesting. Western Kentucky came with the back door, and then I think they got mad because they were trying to take a knee, and the players were trying to like strip the ball or whatever. So that coach was a little fiery. So it's going to be interesting to see. All right, I really appreciate the time, Rob. Once again, just let everyone know where they can follow you. I know you mentioned a few times, but we could have some new people in here.
Yeah, real quick, if you want to find the work that we do, the content that we provide over at wagertalk.com, that's where you'll find all my work. In fact, we're filming videos today for a bunch of college and NFL games, the whole team of analysts over there. But you can get all of that content for free. Just go to wagertalk.com, put your email address in, sign up as a member, and boom, you're off to the races, and you'll get analysis from, I think there's 23 analysts over there.
Wow.
On every game, whether it be baseball, NFL, college football, basketball season's coming. So whatever you like against the point spread, whatever you're betting, you'll find there at wagertalk.com. If you're interested in selection packages, my work is over there as well. You can purchase mine, wagertalk.com on my homepage. If you want to find me on Twitter, that's real simple. It's at Rob Vino Sports.
Do you know what games you're going to be covering today, by chance?
Yeah, we're going to do the Oklahoma-Nebraska game, which you and I just did.
Okay.
We're going to do West Virginia, Virginia Tech, and we're going to do the Ravens and the Chiefs.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's the panel I was assigned to.
We could see some line move with that one, so that's going to be an interesting one to listen to. And you'll be on Twitter. Can we find that on Twitter?
It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Twitter, and then it just stays up on the shelf on YouTube all week long. So yeah, you can find those. There'll be a slew of them. I happen to be paneled with 2 other guys, and there's about 6 or 7 different panels doing different games. So yeah, you can catch them all. Wagertalk.com.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you hopping on. Hopefully we'll have you on again next week, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, buddy. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yep. See you.